Shalom Aleichem und seid begrüßt, or hello to all of you. And so this is a topic many of you have requested. And this is going to be our first language learning presentation ever since my great revolution, beginning of this year. I also had another request for a language-specific presentation on Kiribati or Gilbertese. That will be forthcoming as well. My entire grand entrance at the Polyglot Gathering in Bratislava notwithstanding. So today we are going to look at Yiddish, how to learn it, how to use it, what makes it easy, what makes it hard, and what traps to avoid. And happy Lady Day to everyone. And so let's go ahead and hop right in. One thing you should know about this presentation is the fact that it is a bit more minimalistic in terms of its pictures than normal. Okay then, so what exactly is Yiddish? So first, let's go ahead and rewind back 1,000 years to when Jews entered to Germany from places such as Spain, France, and Italy to German-speaking areas. The places known as Speyer, Worms, and Mainz were touted as great areas of Jewish culture, and as a result, what developed there at first was Yiddish Teich, which was a variety of German written with Hebrew characters, and as we're going to see, that really ends up evolving in what Mark Slobin, a former teacher of mine, called snowballing through history. And one of the great cataclysmic effects that really happened was the First Crusade. And this actually was so awful to the Jewish communities of those areas that every Ashkenazi Jew alive today actually is descended from a survivor of the First Crusade. As a result, many of these Jews brought their Yiddish Teich elsewhere, primarily to the Polish-Lithuanian Empire further out east, bringing the Yiddish Teich with them. And so this is a variety of German with some Hebrew words in it that really ended up taking a different path. And so Hochdeutsch is an alternate universe version of that in a sense. Although, as I'm going to really get into detail later on, to call contemporary Yiddish a mixture of German, Hebrew, and Slavic, or to call it like some variety of Creole language, the fact is that it is no more or less of a mixture than, for example, Swedish would be, which also has elements not only from Norse languages, but also German, French, Italian, and English as well. And so Yiddish is a combination of German, Slavic languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Hungarian, if Swedish is a combination of Viking language, I'm sorry to use that term, German, French, Italian, and English. And so it's very interesting. I often hear Yiddish described as a combination language, but never have I heard Swedish described with that somewhat microaggression-y variety of profile. And so the fact is that the Jews who spoke Yiddish Teich also brought into their language many words from Lashon Kodesh, which is holy language, namely the Hebrew and Aramaic that they knew not only through the prayers, but also through the Holy Scriptures and the Talmud as well. And so as a result, to say, of course, in Yiddish you would say avade, which is a word that's commonly used in Talmudic discourse as well. And another thing that's very noteworthy as well is the fact that as a result of their presence among Slavic peoples, at first with Poles, and then later on with Ukrainians and Russians and Czechoslovaks, and then of course, despite the fact that they are not Slavs, Hungarians as well, they all have brought their own slice of Yiddish, although I would argue that the Polish influence is by far the strongest. And so a number of significant words, like for example, ratoven comes from ratować in Polish, which means to rescue, which in turn was actually a Germanic word that was Slavified and then Germanicized again into Yiddish. A chainik is another example referring to a tea kettle. I could go on accordingly. Also, other various Slavic words would include večera, I believe this comes from Ukrainian, meaning an evening meal. Krečme, this comes from Czech and Slovak, meaning a pub. And there are a bunch of other examples as well. Concerning Hungarian, one noteworthy influence is the new suffix. And so, for example, Gotenu would mean like dear God. And so that's one example as well. Okay, and then other influences. The fact is that I've heard that the original Ashkenazi Judaism, some people may believe, now I know I'm going to get flack for this, actually started in Italy. And as a result, as one of my professors from the Heidelberg, he said, it was Johannes Hayo, that was his name, he said, keep in mind that when Jews moved from sunny Italy to cold Germany, it was because it wasn't a choice. And so the fact is I bring this in because there is some Latin influence that's felt as well. And so Benchen, so for example, if you grew up in an Orthodox Jewish day school, you may have heard the phrase Rabbi Sai Mivel Benchen, or how do I do that? So, dear everyone, or dear folks, let us pray. And so Benchen, usually referring to reciting the grace after meals, which would be Birkas Hamazon, or Birkat Hamazon, if you want the Hebrew pronunciation, or the Sephardi Hebrew pronunciation used in Israel today. That actually comes from Bene Dicere. And then, of course, Cholent comes from an old French word meaning to cook slowly as well. And this was specifically a Jewish dish that was designed so as to circumvent the Isurim, or the prohibitions of Shabbos. Yeah, I know that I'm somehow really hopping between a lot of topics right now, but you know, this is not necessarily the life I chose, but the life that was thrown upon me. Okay. And I really have to say, I really like Yiddish. Is the first language I became fluent in as an adult and remains one of my favorites to this day. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead, and now that we've discussed exactly what Yiddish is in terms of its elements, obviously concerning the modern history is a little bit more well known, but I'll go ahead and recap. The Holocaust very sadly did disproportionately affect Yiddish speakers. Of the 6 million that were killed in the Shoah, good 80% of them spoke Yiddish as their mother tongue, and I would imagine even a higher percentage were fluent speakers. And it was really also dealt a losing hand in multiple places concerning Israel, where it was to be stamped out in favor of Hebrew, although nowadays there are many students in Tel Aviv and what have you that have become fluent in Yiddish, and many other aspects of Yiddish culture continue to not only survive but also flourish. In the United States, there was also this understanding that the language of the old country was to be thrown off in favor of American identity, and I really have to say, literally not a single person who I have heard say, my grandparents spoke Yiddish and they didn't pass it on to me, literally zero are happy with that decision. And concerning in many other places as well, it did remain perhaps a little bit of a niche in other places such as Argentina, Canada, France, Australia, among other places. And of course, okay, now I'm getting a bit of ahead of myself. And then nowadays, varieties of Yiddish are classified by UNESCO as endangered on various scales. And so now you're probably curious, how exactly do I start with Yiddish? And so Mango Languages does have a little introductory course to Yiddish, and I find that the accent is very good. I also like the colloquial Yiddish book, which I just realized I actually left out on this list, but you can actually get the audio of that book for free from Routledge. And so the apps are a way to, well, how do I put it? They give you a really good glimpse of it at first, but they're not a good way to really become fully conversationalist. And for that, I would mention 3 books in addition to the not on the slide colloquial Yiddish from Routledge that I mentioned. College Yiddish by Uriel Weinreich is one of the classics, really using deep Yiddish stories from both a secular and a religious nature from across the board, not only classic retellings of Bible stories and Holocaust memoirs, but also, most interestingly, a study concerning do Jews have larger noses than other people. And, well, I guess you're probably going to have to read that passage and see for yourself exactly what conclusion he comes to. And then Sheva Zucker's books are also very good for beginners. They really teach you a lot about the alphabet and grammar, and I would imagine it's more bite-sized and a lot less of a fire hydrant than Uriel Weinreich's book. And in addition to that, Uriel Weinreich compiled a fantastic Yiddish dictionary, and I would say it is probably the most thorough and user-friendly dictionary I have ever encountered for any language, period. And it is right by my side right here, actually. And so definitely go ahead and check that out. And we're going to go get into another aspect of Yiddish shortly concerning the fact that Hebrew and Aramaic words are, well, I guess you're going to find out. But suffice it to say that Uriel Weinreich manages to get over that hurdle very, very well. And now you're probably curious exactly how you end up using the Yiddish language. And so for one, the Yiddish Daily Forward is continuing to become more and more user-friendly, despite the fact that it is now migrated fully to the cyberspace. And so the Yiddish Daily Forward does come not only fantastic articles about a lot of topics that are very interesting, but they also come with a glossary feature which you can highlight any word and then you'll have it looked up in a dictionary, and so that can really help you. There are some minor issues with the dictionary, but above all, it's very, very good. And there are also many audio resources that's found as well, especially for beginners. Another audio resource that I think is floating around the net somewhere, although I was worried that it was taken down, was the SBS Radio Australia Yiddish broadcasts, and they were actually significantly fun by virtue of the fact that there were a variety of people interviewed in that program, literally from all over the world, who are fluent in Yiddish to various levels. And I think it's really inspiring to really partake of all of their stories. And perhaps if you're an intermediate learner, realize that you're closer to fluency than you may think. And of course, the wealth of the Yiddish song, if you go to places like the National Yiddish Book Center, which I had the honor of being a summer fellow then, back in the summer of 2010, the fact is that there is not only a lot of fantastic songs with creative texts, by texts I mean song lyrics, that will really teach you a lot about vocabulary in deep detail, but you may actually have heard more of these songs than you think. A lot of these songs have really entered in contemporary popular discourse in a number of ways. One considerably surprising example is that the Vilna Ghetto song Dona Dona has actually been translated into Vietnamese. And so actually, literally when I was in Yangon in Myanmar, I actually heard an audio version of it on the street. Yes, you heard that correctly. Yiddish has shown up in many surprising places, including but not limited to the GDR, North Korea. I've even heard conversations in Yiddish in, not in Greenland actually, but in Pacific Island countries I've heard them. And anyhow, they're a truly wonderful resource. There are some people who are not fully fluent in Yiddish who do end up singing these songs, but above all, I would say most renditions are good. And then, of course, the literature, a lot of which is becoming increasingly more accessible to learners of many types. 98% of Yiddish literature throughout the ages is untranslated. Aaron Lansky of the National Yiddish Book Center fame says that it was the largest literary outpouring of any culture in all of human history. So Yiddish newspapers were so huge that the Yiddish newspapers would actually receive election results even on a national level before English language newspapers. And the fact is that there are so many fantastic theatrical texts, compilations. The fact is that there were huge translations of books that you know from other languages into Yiddish as well. And it's also interesting because I've read Shakespeare in Yiddish, and it's somewhat very clear from some of the translations that they didn't really understand Shakespearean English to the fullest extent, but it's cute to read anyhow. And then lastly, possibly the best way, friends and events. Jeffrey Williamson, who may be watching this right now, a friend of mine and a Yiddishist, he said that Yiddish is like a secret handshake. And this is extremely true. The fact is that Yiddish will really open you up instant friendships. you will really find a lot of fantastic, not only social but professional connections as well. And the Yiddishist world, while it is growing, is still significantly small enough to be a mishpoche, in a sense, or a family. And so you really, the fact is that I found that Yiddish really motivated me to become a language learner for life a lot more than, for example, learning global languages in high school would have done. Sorry, Spanish, you're nice and all that, but the fact is that I think that Yiddish really showed me exactly where my heart is in many respects. All right, so what is easy about Yiddish? So sentence structure is similar to English. And the fact is that it is more fluid than German. And so, for example, I'm trying to put in a word. So someone would ask, "Du fährst? Are you leaving?" Or "Du hörst? Are you listening?" as a question. This would not pass in Hochdeutsch. And the sentence structure is somewhat more similar to that of a Slavic language and being more fluid. I'd actually heard that earlier versions of German were significantly more fluid as well. The fact is that while you really have to deal with a word of hurt concerning German sentence structure, you have no such thing to worry about as concerns Yiddish. And then, of course, if you're a native English speaker, you're going to recognize a lot of words, which is another thing that's really noteworthy. There are just simply too many examples. Just find a Yiddish text. Actually, you can find one in the background. So, teme chocolade. You could probably see that in the background. So, theme chocolate. And the fact is granted, there are some of them you can recognize from Latin, other than from Germanic or from Saxon, in a sense. But yeah, you're going to really feel at home. If you have a yeshivish background as well, there are a lot of words and idioms that you'll recognize. So one example is makabel ponim zayin, means to accept someone, or to greet someone or as a guest, as literally comes from the Hebrew phrase to accept the face. And this not only survived not only in contemporary yeshivish speech, which one of my teachers described as English, but was spoken with all of the Hebrew and Aramaic components of Yiddish still in place, but also in modern Hebrew as well. And so the fact is that ancient Hebrew influenced Yiddish, and Yiddish in turn influenced a lot of idioms in modern Hebrew as well. And so you're going to find a lot of phrases really used that are going to be very familiar to you, and the vocabulary in true polyglot form is going to really build off of each other. All right, on to what's hard about Yiddish. So the fact is that with the Hebrew and Aramaic words, they are pronounced not as mathematically as you would expect. And so, for example, consider the Hebrew phrase yeshar koach, or like being of upright strength, or like good job. A Yiddish would say that phrase shkoyach. Note that the yud is not the y sound is not actually pronounced at all, and so that's one thing to keep in mind. And then, of course, another example, owing in part to Polish phonology, is that Yaakov, or what we would know as Jacob, is actually pronounced Yankiv. Hence, we get Yankel in a sense. And there are a bunch. The fact is that with the Hebrew and Aramaic words in Yiddish, are with the most varieties, they're written the exact same way that they would be in either Hebrew or Aramaic, but they are pronounced differently. And so you will need to memorize every single one's pronunciation accordingly, a bit like a somewhat easier version of memorizing Chinese characters in various languages of East Asia. And one thing to keep in mind is that they also sometimes put various Hebrew pieces with Germanic or Slavic components in them as well. And so hagenen, meaning to kill, is one example, with the first portion meaning like laharog in Hebrew, meaning to kill, and then the rest of it being a Germanic suffix. Yeah, I'm thinking of so many Yiddish curses, and I'm not going to be saying any of them on camera. Okay, this is not the case with Soviet Yiddish, which is written with phonetic precision with all words. And so the word sho, meaning an hour or time, would actually be written shin Kometz Aleph, as opposed to the standard pronunciation, which they would use the Hebrew spelling of Shin, Ayin, Hey. And some people believe that this was done by the Soviet authorities to stamp out religious influence in Yiddish, and other people believe that it was to make the Yiddish language more accessible, and yet others believe both to be true. And it's interesting because I've dealt with some Yiddish texts in which they even spell like Hanukkah, and they actually write it out phonetically the way that they would be in Yiddish, and not with the five-letter formula that would be familiar to the Hebrew school Jared. And then, of course, we get to the rainbow of Yiddishes with the secular and the Hasidic variety. So when I was in Jerusalem, I got myself a copy of Apple to Apple, which is it's the Yiddish version of Apples to Apples, and that was 10 years ago actually. And then the fact is that they were using words like blueberries and challenges, using Hebrew words when no thinking secular Yiddish speaker would probably use an English word at all. And the fact is I had heard that within ultra-Orthodox communities, do correct me if I'm wrong, that men usually tend to default to more Hebrew and Aramaic words, and women tend to default to more English words. And in addition to that, we also have Yiddish dialectical differences as well. Michael Wex describes this significantly well in the fact that if, concerning, for example, the Litvaks and the Galicianers, or the Lithuanian Jews and those from Galicia, the area that is now southern Poland and northwestern Ukraine. Yes, I got that right. And so the fact is that the U sound is pronounced U in the north, and then the Galicianers would pronounce that E. And so, for example, imagine if half of the country pronounced the word poodle as piddle, and that you probably get the understanding of exactly what Yiddish theater folks were really up against. And so, for example, mishuga, meaning crazy, chances are you probably knew that word. A Galiciano would pronounce it as mishiga. So, eos mishuga, eos mishiga. And so the fact is, also, I had heard that actors really needed to try on a number of dialectical versions as well. And then, lastly, things to know and avoid before my computer runs out of battery. Do not call contemporary Yiddish a mixture of German and Hebrew. I might have done that earlier in the presentation, but that was because I was referencing Yiddish Teich, which was the 1,000-year-old version. Unless you are meeting someone who has no knowledge that Yiddish exists whatsoever, like mostly it's people from East Asia, actually. And, but yeah, also many other places in the world as well. Like I've encountered people from Spain who didn't know what Yiddish was in a sense. Perhaps that's not entirely surprising. The vowel shifts in comparison to standard German are usually consistent, so the O in German becomes Oi in Yiddish, and many A's shift to O's as well. Southern varieties of German, especially as spoken in Bavaria and Austria, have features that were retained in Yiddish but were not retained in Hochdeutsch. And so an Austrian and a Yiddish speaker would both use the phrase abyssal. And lastly, if you know German well enough and you are learning Yiddish, use words of non-Germanic origin frequently. Also make sure to have your accent sound more Central Eastern European as well. So note that native speakers of Polish, for example, can speak with pretty much a perfect Yiddish accent with virtually no effort, and I don't even need to explain why. And so pretty much any variety of old country lilt, even like from Hungary or Romania or Ukraine or Russia, would really do as well. The fact is that to really give it a texture that's very distinct from Hochdeutsch as well. And that's considerably important because Deutschmährisch is also a thing, or a variety of Yiddish with too much German influence. And I know that this was really an overload of information, but if you have anything to say, including corrections or things that I should know, go ahead and let me know. But until then, I wish you Soll sein mit Mazel. May you be with luck, good luck. And then next week, I got inspired by another commenter, how to relearn a language you've forgotten. And then the Kiribati one will likely come after that. And have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Oh, and do let me know if I've used too much jargon. I will define anything necessary. Bye-bye.